Here we go. We are live. Welcome, everyone, to another fantastic extra special. I know I use that word much too often, but it is very special indeed, to our decanted webinar series together with Wine Access. My name is Deyvanshi Masrani with Haute Living, and I am very thrilled and honored to be here today with some of the most impactful figures in the wine scene as a whole. Um, Obviously in Napa, but also in globally. So this is extra special. And I know we have a lot of viewers that are joining in, including an additional panelist who is joining in right now as well. Little technical issues, but nonetheless, we are extremely excited. I am going to, can you hear us, Philippe?
Thank you.
Perfect, perfect.
Oh, wonderful.
Perfect timing. So we're now live, and I am going to introduce each guest one by one, read their bios. Bear with me, each bio is super impressive, so I want to get through all of them just to give a bit of backdrop for all of our viewers who are tuning in today with us. And also bear with me if my pronunciations are not perfect. I apologize in advance, but it happens. I also encourage all of our viewers today to engage in the conversation. Please feel free to ask questions in the Q&A and in the chat. And as always, we will get to as many as we can tonight. So thank you everyone for being here. And we'll start with Mr. Andy Erickson. Welcome. Andy met his wife Annie shortly after arriving in Napa Valley in 1994. They connected immediately through a shared passion for where they lived, what they did, and what they could do. They loved and continue to love growing things, creating, building, cooking, fermenting, preserving, and of course, the results of all that activity. Growing grapes and making wine have become the center of their daily work lives, bringing them to many incredible places and helping them forge great and meaningful friendships. With their wine business, what started literally as a garage project has since bloomed into something sustainable, attracting a small but formidable team that has further strengthened their ability to grow and to improve. Though their development continues, Andy is happy it still feels like a family business, just with a growing family instead. As a winemaker, Andy's goal is to highlight the character of each of the unique vineyard sites which he works in, whether at his clients' estate vineyards or the vineyards that produce his own Favia wines. Experiences gained from a summer in France during university and many subsequent trips to wine-growing regions of Europe have fueled his enthusiasm for the concept of terroir, as well as for wines made from special places. While he feels fortunate enough to travel and work with wineries in other parts of the world, he feels incredibly lucky to call Napa Valley his home and is constantly marveled by the diversity of soils and microclimates in this small but diverse valley. Welcome again, Andy. Thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thank you, and thank you for reading the long version. I didn't realize you were going to be sent the tome, but thank you. Great to be.
Don't worry. We're doing all the long versions. Everyone deserves to hear these impressive bios, like I said. So here we go. Next up, we have Dan Petroski. Dan was born and raised in Brooklyn, New York, and has the swagger and accent to prove it. After attending Columbia University, where he played football, Dan went to work for Time Inc. And while there, he earned his MBA from NYU and worked his way up the ranks towards a promising future in magazine publishing. A good chunk of his tenure at Time was spent managing advertising clients, which involved considerable schmoozing. This is how Dan learned wine, by walking his expense account through the list of Manhattan's top restaurants. When the Wall Street Journal tried to poach him, Dan took a moment to reflect. Deciding a change of life was in order, he jettisoned to Sicily for a year, where he interned at Valle della Cate. While Dan's intention was to return to New York to sell wine, a harvest invitation from Andy Smith at Dumont in 2006 was too good to pass up, and Dan left the city again, this time facing west. After harvest, Andy Smith hired Dan as cellar master at Larkmead. The following year, Dan was promoted to assistant winemaker, ultimately claiming the Larkmead winemaker title in 2012. Before cementing his status as a Napa Valley Cabernet winemaker, in 2009, launched a white wine-only brand called Massican. Massican is Dan's ode to the Mediterranean and his time spent living in Italy and drinking white wine. Dan is a gifted, instinctual winemaker, and his old world palate has guided his philosophy on wine. Dan's approach and ability to craft wines as diverse as Cabernet Sauvignon and Tokai Friulano has earned him the recognition as San Francisco Chronicle's Winemaker of the Year in 2017. Welcome, Dan. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, guys. I truly appreciate it. A wonderful introduction. Thank you. I will say that while you were introducing Andy and his accomplishments, I was on his wife's website buying his tea when you're talking about fermented products and so forth. So I'm actually going to continue that after this seminar. But it reminded me that Andy Annie has a great product on the other side of wine, which we all can appreciate. So Thank you all. Excited to be here.
I love that. Thank you for mentioning that. As a tea lover myself, that is very good to know. Continuing on to Helen Keplinger, who was named Winemaker of the Year by Food and Wine magazine in 2012. She is one of the very few American winemakers who have worked extensively in Europe. She spent 3 years in the Priorat region of Spain at Cellars Melis before making Napa Valley her home, where she has worked with several wineries, including Grace Family Vineyards, Bryant Family Vineyard, Arrow and Branch, and Kenzo Estate. She and her husband, DJ Warner, have their own brand, Keplinger Wines, which emphasizes single vineyard Rhone Valley variety wines. Helen holds a Bachelor of Science degree in biology from Smith College and a Master of Science degree in enology from the University of California, Davis. Welcome, Helen. Thank you for being here as well.
Thank you for having me.
Have you? Of course, of course. Is there anything more cringy than sitting through your bio, just out of curiosity? No, just wondering. I hate to be, of course, but you know.
Really nothing.
I had to put it out there. We have just a few more to go, I promise. Philippe Melka. Like the celebrated wines on which he's built his reputation, Philippe Melka's career has been influenced by soil. A native of Bordeaux, Melka grew up intrigued by the intricacies of the land around him. When it came time for college, he acted on his childhood interests, earning a degree in geology at the University of Bordeaux. A class in winemaking in his final year was a turning point, propelling him to earn a master's degree in agronomy and enology. Melka has the rare combination of talent and fortune to be a winemaker who started at the top. The first job out of school was at Chateaubriand. From there, he took a position with the reputable Moex company and was sent to Dominus Estate in Yountville to study soils in 1991. Napa Valley soil proved to be a revelation for Melka. He set out traveling, dividing time between soil study and winemaking at world-renowned wineries Badio o Colti Buono in Chianti and Chittering Estate in Australia. He returned to France in '93 to deepen his expertise at Chateau Petrus. He has been fortunate to have been trained and influenced by some of the most notable personalities in the wine business, such as Jean Delmas and Jean-Philippe Masclef from Haute, Christian Moex, and Jean-Claude Berrouet from Petrus, Paul Draper from Ridge, Daniel Baron from Silver Oak, and globe-trotting wine consultant Michel Roland, with whom he continues to work with on continuing projects. In '94, he returned to Napa full-time, and for the past 20 years, Melka has served as winemaking consultant for some of Napa's most highly regarded properties under his company Atelier Melka, founded in 1995. As co-proprietor of Melka Estates, Philippe and Sherry produce 4 distinct labels that reflect their philosophy of soil-driven wines: Matisse from Napa Valley, Macara from Sonoma Valley, Majestique from around the world, and CJ also from Napa Valley. Welcome, Philippe. Whew.
Thank you. Good. I don't know how you did it with all of us. That was a performance. Good job.
This is how I do it. This helps. Okay, continuing on. So of course, these are all super impressive bios. So I just wanted to take some time to highlight everybody that we're so proud to have here with us today. So of course, Kamal Hotchandani co-founded his highly celebrated luxury platform, Haute Living, over 15 years ago in Miami, Florida, building a network and audience from some of the most affluent and successful business people, philanthropists, entrepreneurs, and celebrities in key US and international markets like New York, LA, Miami, London, Dubai, and more. His personal affinity and love of fine wine led to partnerships with some of the most celebrated wineries and spirits houses in the world, such as Dom Perignon, Cristal, Louis XIII, Armand de Berniac, and Perrier-Jouet, as well as cover features with some of the most noteworthy figures in the fine wine world, including Francis Ford Coppola, Bill Harlan, Marguerite Mondavi, and others. He's been featured in globally renowned publications for his wealth of knowledge, specifically in the celebrity athlete wine space, and facilitated monumental experiences like assisting the legendary Kobe Bryant in launching his watch at the Napa Valley Reserve. Taking this one step further, he most recently launched Haute Wine Society under the Haute Living umbrella, a digital platform dedicated to fine wine and spirits featuring exclusive content with like-minded wine aficionados like Carmelo Anthony, Sting, Jimmy Butler, Luis Fonsi, Ludacris, LeBron James, and so many more. Welcome, Kamal.
Thank you.
And last but certainly not least, the lovely Ms. Vanessa Conlon. Vanessa was head of sales and marketing for several of Napa's most prestigious estates, including Arietta Wines, Dana Estates, and Realm Cellars. Previously, she was a retail buyer and wine bar wine director in New York. She is president of the board for the Jameson Animal Rescue Ranch, holds the Wine and Spirits Education Trust, or WSET diploma, and was the recipient of the Nikki Singer Memorial Scholarship from the International Wine Center. Vanessa became the 52nd Master of Wine in the United States in February of this year. Welcome, Vanessa.
Thank you, Deyvanshi.
I feel like cheers to that.
We need to toast.
Yeah, cheers.
Toast to you.
Thank you.
Well done.
Okay. Well, here we go. Here we are this evening. So I am going to hand it over to you guys to sort of first and foremost introduce the wines that we are drinking today. So let's start with Andy, if you don't mind.
So I decided, and it's pretty funny because Vanessa asked me what wine we should serve, and also Annie, my wife, and we both independently just basically came up with the same wine, which is our 2011 Cerro Sur, we call it, means the South Hill. This is 85% Cabernet Franc, and the rest is Cabernet Sauvignon. It's coming from a high elevation vineyard on the east side of Napa, up in the mountains, east of this Coombsville area where we are in the south part of the valley. Beautiful old 40-year-old vines, north-facing slope, sandstone and volcanic soils. And what I love about this wine is that it really it's something we're proud of. 2011 was considered a very difficult year in Napa Valley. We're not used to having fall rains and cool temperatures. 2011 was a cool year. So something we're not really accustomed to in California. You know, we're used to sunshine and dry weather. And, you know, at the end of the season, there were a lot of wines that came in that were, I would call them more European in style. I mean, they're not really big and ripe wines, but they're very lively, very aromatic. And this vineyard, coming from high elevation, we didn't have a lot of the issues that vineyards on the valley floor had in 2011 in terms of problems from the rain. But I just love the aromatic profile of the wine, the balance of the wine, and really how it's aging. I mean, it was a wine that, it was a vintage that the critics were not in love with, let's put it that way. But the more we open these bottles and taste them, they're just going to age for a long time, and they're beautiful wines. They have lots of acidity, beautiful aromatics. They're just taking on this real sort of beautiful cedar note from the bottle age. And Cabernet Franc is our favorite variety in the valley. It's not planted in too many vineyards. I just read recently that it's 6% or less of vineyards in Napa are Cabernet Franc. And so to find these sites that are just so perfect for the variety, that's what we love. And this is one of them in my eyes. I mean, it's a very unique site. I always like wines where, especially European wines, when I taste a wine and I think, oh my God, where's this from? I want to go visit that place. I feel like this is one of those wines. It's very unique. And you couldn't replicate this wine if you said, well, we only make 300 to 500 cases a year because it's a small vineyard. We should be making 5,000 cases a year. You just couldn't do that because it's very specific to this certain place. So there's so many different reasons why I chose the wine, but really the vintage to me is something that I like even more every time I open a bottle of 2011, and it's one of our favorite wines. We've been, this year would have been our 18th vintage of this wine, but the fire did sweep through the vineyard in 2020, so we're gonna miss this vintage. But 11 challenging in its own ways, but I love to taste the wine and relive the vintage. And so that's the short story.
Great. And
Wonderful.
Deyvanshi is posting the links in the chat.
Yes, for
Great.
anyone, because I know that question comes up all too often. So every 15 or 20 minutes or so, I'll repost the links for everybody who comes a little late. They're available for purchase, and for more information, you can check them out on the links that I sent in the chat. And Dan, why don't you give us a little bit of a backdrop on the wine that we have today from you as well?
For sure. This is the Larkmead 2010 Solari. And I'm gonna, kind of steal a little bit of Andy's commentary on this one because Andy and Annie picked the vintage that I adore, 2011. And I think 2010 can be kind of classified in a very similar category of being a little bit of a cooler vintage, a little bit of a more an average to above average rainfall year. And where we're located, so Coombsville, where Andy's wine is from, is in the south of Napa, and where Larkmead, where I'm sitting today, is in the northernmost parts of Napa Valley, and it tends to be some of the driest and hottest parts of Napa Valley. And when we have a cool vintage and we have a year where there's a little extra rainfall, we have a little extra time for the grapes to evolve and develop and mature on the vine. And that's very rare for us up here in the northern parts of Napa Valley. So on the valley floor, where Larkmead is located. So it was really great to pick this wine for those reasons, because I do feel that Larkmead excels in cooler vintages, years like 2006, where you have this quote unquote winemakers vintage, where, the grapes ripen at a pace, at this really slow maturation pace, where you have the choices to make the wine. And 2006, 2010, 2011, 2013, 2016, those are the vintages that I feel are 2018 are winemakers vintages for Larkmead, for Northern Napa Valley and the valley floor. And this particular wine I picked for those reasons, because I think it shines with regards to Larkmead's kind of style and its presence and its texture and its terroir. As Andy said, as you drink a glass of wine, you want to kind of transport yourself to that place. You want to figure out what you want to dig a little deeper into the soils, to dig a little deeper into the culture of that place. And in 2010 Solari, and Solari is named, it's our reserve wine. It's the flagship wine of Larkmead. It is a wine that was named after the family that bought the vineyard in 1948. It is the toughest wine I make every year because it's named after the family that's owned the property now for 70 plus years. So it's difficult for me to kind of really connect with this wine in a non-emotional way because of that connection to the family. But it's like a cool vintage in a very hot, very stressful environment where Larkmead is located. And it just really opens the wine up. It really gives the wine this breadth of texture and nuance and complexity we don't really get when you're in a warm year like 2020, when I'm picking grapes this year in the end of August. On August 31st, I'm starting to pick Cabernet. These grapes are picked for this wine and in mid-October. So it's almost a 6-week differential. So you can think about 6 weeks on the vine as you think about how that ages into a complexity and a nuance and a texture that really just kind of shines in the glass, which makes me excited for drinking a glass of wine. So that's why I picked the wine. It's also probably my mentor and my boss here at Larkmead, when he hired me, it's probably our collective best wine that Larkmead's ever put under cork. So I wanted to share that with you all. And also I'm sitting amongst some of the greatest winemakers of Napa Valley. I got to have a great fucking wine to kind of share with you all. I mean, these guys are legends. They built the Napa Valley, and Andy and Philippe and Helen, they are not only peers and friends of mine, but they're just like, up there. So I wanted to put our best wine on the table.
That's fantastic. And we couldn't agree with you more. So we're all in very good company this evening. Helen, why don't you introduce your wine as well, please?
Sure. So I decided to pour our 2015 Sumo, which is actually from Shake Ridge Vineyard in Sutter Creek up in Amador County. And I know it's a Napa Valley panel and we're Napa Valley winemakers, but I think, wine takes you on a journey and it takes you to many different places. And it's such an organic path. And so at Keplinger, I did make wine in Spain and in Priorat, and fell in love with Grenache and just the way that in that tiny little region, the soil is very similar on most of the sites. It's licorrea, but the wines are very, very different. And it's all based on aspect and slope and humidity and airflow. And just, there's so many little details. And I found that absolutely totally beguiling and intriguing. And so when I came back to make wine in Napa, I started looking for Grenache to make my own label. And as it happens, one winter I was talking to Andy and we were catching up just about what we were doing. And I told him I was starting my own label. And he said, "You have to meet Anne Kramer." And I said, "Who's Anne Kramer?" And he said, "Well, Anne Kramer has Shake Ridge Vineyard in Amador County. She's amazing. She and Annie worked very closely for many years. She's an incredible farmer. This property is just beautiful." And I was looking for Grenache around Napa and Sonoma. I hadn't even thought of the foothills, but because of Andy, thank you, Andy and Annie, I headed out to Anne Kramer's vineyard, and you drive up to the front gate and it's beautiful. It's so beautifully farmed. And I think that's why I picked this wine. I went to Anne's vineyard looking for Grenache and coming back with Petit Syrah, which I had no intention of making, but she didn't have any Grenache the first year that I was looking. And I talked to her for a year. It was almost like we were dating. And she's so interesting and enthusiastic and such an incredible farmer that I knew I wanted to work with her. And so the second year when she told me she didn't have any Grenache and that she had Petit Syrah, she gave me all these, her winemaker made samples from all of the blocks of Petit Syrah and Syrah that were available. So I picked up all of those barrel samples and just kept an open mind and tasted through everything. And I mean, the fruit is so pure and so beautiful from that vineyard and her farming that I did this blend on my countertop of Petit Syrah and Syrah, which was really just so pretty. And Petit Syrah is such a historic grape for California and has such a great place in history and absolutely my respect, but it won me over tasting these samples. And then I just thought it would be really fun to add a top note of Viognier. And so I went back to Anne with that blend in mind and she said, absolutely. And I told her the blocks and she said, no problem. And so this wine was such a surprise because it wasn't anything I set out to make, but it just, I think, you know, that's definitely life for sure. But I think that's wine. It takes you on a journey. And I wanted to just take us out of Napa Valley for a moment to try some Petit Syrah that's really just beautifully farmed. And it has gorgeous fruit and purity and every vintage is beautiful. And I chose the 15 because it still has so much freshness and vivacity, and Petit Syrah we know will age forever. But it's also very plush and round, and it has just the beginning of what age does to a wine to pull out a lot of the higher aromatics and just tease out all of the nuances. So that's why I chose the 15 Sumo.
Thank you. That's lovely. Wonderful. So as we sip on these wines, it looks like there are a lot of people joining us who are doing the same.
Did we talk about Philippe's wine?
No, we don't need to.
I certainly think we should, because I was just about to say we're getting a lot of questions about you, Philippe. So if you don't mind a little bit of backdrop as well.
Okay. Well, I don't know which kind of questions you're getting, but I'm happy to jump the gun and talk about the wine here. By the way, those guys are so good about talking about their product. I feel like you guys are not enough in the cellar, but way too much on the roads.
Yeah, but Philippe, you have the French accent, so you got it nailed.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's like, I always say, you know, when people ask me, what's wrong with you, really, after so many years in this country, nobody can understand still what you're saying. I say it's an asset, you know, you have to keep that with you. People feel like you're so smart just because they have no idea what you are talking about in general. So I kept that with me. Sometimes I say that I'm from Texas, the southern part of Texas as well. But it doesn't work as well as just saying, I'm just a French frog, trying to survive in this place. So anyway, guys, good job. I'm wanted to talk a little bit about, what I selected, and I'm be watching you all, so watch out. But we call this wine Mekera because it comes from Sonoma, and on the back label we usually put the name of the vineyard and the blend. A little bit like Andy was saying, this is a Cabernet Franc based wine because, as you're going to, for your audience, realize the winemakers really love this grape for good reason. I mean, we really find that, at least on my side, it's a grape we really tend to bring a little bit more serious feel to the wine, where Cabernet Sauvignon tend to be so lush and generous and sometimes too approachable. Cab Franc bring a little bit more tension. A little bit more, tightness sometimes, a little bit more feel of, longevity and energy. That's why we love it so much. But the story of this wine, it's, we started with my wife, actually a little bit like Andy. It's kind of a husband and wife story here, the Melka estate. We started back in '96. And, of course, we were Napa Valley focused and really Cabernet Sauvignon focused at the time. And we really kind of dream about doing something else. And obviously working in a right bank, Merlot Cab Franc was always on the back of my mind. So in the early 2000, we kind of look on internet and see this kind of piece of land for sale a little bit by accident. And we went to check it out. And it was basically a journey to go there. We had to drive to Sonoma. Oh my God, Sonoma, we live in Napa. What's going on here? And we realized that we were actually driving, along the vineyard of Peter Michael. So on Knights Valley, for people who know a little bit this road, going up on Aida Clayton Road. And the piece of land was located at 2,500 feet, which is kind of, a no man's land in California purpose. There's very, very few vineyards at this kind of elevation. So we kind of fell in love with it right away. And by looking at the soil type, we really feel like Cabernet Franc and Merlot were kind of the good vibe. Even if we were looking at the Chardonnay from Peter Michael, we were like, let's try, to do a red wine. Let's go back to what we love, which is Cab Franc Merlot, and let's try to see what we can do. So we had to plant the vineyard. We went through the whole kind of planting situation. So it took us a while, and 2007 was the first vintage that we made. We're still trying to learn from this side. This is a very, I would say, difficult site in regards where you're above the fog. You think you're in a cooler side, so the spring is cooler, but summer can become very warm, especially at night. So things are changing very quickly on a daily basis. And really the focus, and I think the key of the success for the wine that we are making, it's really harvest date and get the timing right there. It's usually a 50-50, 50% plus or minus Cab Franc Merlot. That's the way it was planted, but also it always makes sense, when we created those blends to kind of work with those percentage. I have 2015, so those guys, Helen had 2015 as well, Andy and Dan has 2011. So 2015 actually was a reverse of 11. A very challenging vintage, but in a different way, because a very early year, we picked about a month earlier than normal. So we had to really capture the freshness. as much freshness and energies that we could. So that's why I thought the Cabernet Franc in 15 actually performed better than Cabernet Sauvignon in general for me in California. And that's why I always really like what the 15 were doing. And the first little detail I will say that I always remember about 15, we didn't have any seeds in berries. There is like seedless berries, which really, I think, help us to create those softer, more integrated tannins at the end, because the berries were extremely small because of drought of spring. The skin were very thick, so we were like, we're going to need to do some very gentle maceration, otherwise we are going to create monsters. So the seedless really help us to get some really wines very well integrated early. So this wine, it's like all of the labels, about 350 cases overall. So that's the story of the wine.
Perfect. Thank you, Philippe. I'll hand it over to Vanessa now to start off this exciting panel, and I'll interject with some of these questions we're receiving as well from our audience members.
Wonderful. Thank you. Well, first of all, thank you, Deyvanshi and Kamal and Haute Living for hosting this amazing event. And I'm going to try to keep it clean when I say, like, this is an amazing panel. And thanks to Dan, we kind of were shooting ideas off each other a couple months ago, and we're like, well, let's just shoot for the moon. What would be like the most amazing panel to get? And look, here you all are tonight. So thank you. And the idea behind this was really to we're not here to talk about pH and élevage. We're here to talk about you and your stories. And you are the building blocks of this valley. You're the past, present, and future. And to really talk about your individual mentors, the inspiration behind what you do, and kind of unearth those stories that we love to do at Wine Access. Speaking of which, I know Deyvanshi's posting in the chat any links to these wines, which are all available tonight if you want to check them out. And just on a personal note, I want to say also about this panel, this happens to be so special to me. These four people, Dan, I met before I ever moved to Napa Valley. We met in New York, one of the first people, that I knew out here, and such a dear friend of mine. Helen was my neighbor for many years. We used to chicken sit and cat sit, and she's such an inspiration to me. Of course, my very first winery job was at Arietta, where Andy is at the helm, and then place I spent the most time of any winery in Napa Valley was at Donna Estates, where of course where Philippe is at the helm. So this is truly like coming home tonight. So thank you all again so much for being here. But so to go back to the idea behind this panel, which is sort of the stories and how you got here. I'd love actually, Helen, to start with you and ask you, what is in terms of winemaking or where you got to be where you are today, what's the best piece of advice that you ever got?
Oh my God, why did you have to ask me that one?
No advice.
Remember, okay, so full disclosure, we were given a list of potential questions to warm us up. And this question, I don't, this was one I couldn't answer. I don't know.
Okay, we'll come back to you then. How's that? Andy, you're on the hot seat. What's the best piece of advice you ever got?
When I was like Helen, I didn't want to touch this question, but when I started thinking about it,
you all hate my question. Thank you very much.
No, something came to mind though, where, and this wasn't when I was just getting started in the industry, but when I started my own winery and started consulting for people, this was in the early 2000s. I started consulting for other wineries, and there were a lot of things happening. And at that time, and still I do some things with David Abreu, who's a vineyard manager. He also makes great wine. But at that time, I had 3 or 4 clients, and I was being approached by people, and it was really great. He came to me one day and he said, you have to picture, if you're going to take a new project on, you have to picture all your clients at a dinner party, and you're going to invite somebody new into the picture. What is that person bringing to the table? How is everyone that you're already working with going to view this new person? And I just thought, that was so cool. And I still kind of think that way. I mean, I don't have so many projects going on, but every time I take something on, I try to think like, how is this really going to fit into what I'm doing? I've never had a plan. So many people, one of your other questions is what do young winemakers ask you? And people ask like, well, how did you decide to do what you're doing? And the fact is like, I never had a plan. I came to the Valley with an idea that I wanted to make wine. I just fell in love with the idea. I grew up around agriculture, and, you know, I kind of fell into moving to the Valley and making wine. And I've never had a plan, but I just sort of make it up every day. And it's just such a great place and a great industry. But anyway, the quote was, I mean, the advice was just be careful what you take on. So I always think about that.
Got it. Well, you mentioned the question of, you know, what's a question that sort of young winemakers ask you. So Dan, maybe you can take this next one. Is there a question that people ask you a lot that you wish they would just stop asking you?
Yeah, I do think that we here in California, as Napa Valley winemakers, California winemakers, we get a lot of this, like, how do we do it too? And it's something that I've spent a lot of my time, energy, and effort trying, you know, kind of the paying it forward. I was very fortunate to be given an opportunity to move forward in this industry by the right time in the right place and paying. And then, so I've always decided that it's time to pay it forward. And I get a lot of the, how do you change your career question? You know, at the end of the day, my advice is like, take the risk. Like, a lot of people don't want to take the risk. A lot of people don't want to change their lives. I mean, a lot of people have families and things they have responsibility and accountability for in their life. But if they're not truly willing to take the risk, then don't ask me the question. So I think that's the one thing that I've, you know, from the 15 years I've been, since I left New York City and moved to Italy and then ended up here, that's the one question I get more often than not, is like, how can I also become a winemaker? But I'm like, if you're not ready to take the risk, if you're in the mid 30s, like I was, don't ask the question. You gotta, like, that's soul searching. That's something you have to find in yourself, to kind of move that question forward. But, yeah, the one question I asked as a young winemaker, you know, I moved out here, and this goes back to your original question about advice. You know, Andy Smith, when I started with him, he said, everything ripens in California. And, you know, it's funny because this panel is so amazing, because the first thing Andy Erickson said when he started talking about his wines and talking about the sense of place and talking about drinking old world wines, and then to know that Philippe came from France and he started with the Lex family at Dominus back in the day, and that Helen moved, you know, her vision for the wine she wanted to make up to Amador County in cooler climates, and where things were going to have a little bit struggle with ripening, and to make wines that have, you know, a little bit more sense of place, where everything ripens in California. So going back to your question about the best and worst advice you ever got, was everything ripens in California. So, yeah, I mean, that's more of a kind of a theoretical thing to say, but
yeah, including zucchini, which I don't need any more of. So great, thank you, Dan. And so, well, you talked about, you know, taking a risk, and so I guess, Helen, to go back to you and talking about sort of risk taking, was there ever a moment, you know, in your career where you thought, this was the wrong choice, you know, I went too far?
Oh yeah, totally. Early, I mean, probably many times. No, so I came out from the East Coast. I was headed into the world of medicine, and in the application process, while I was writing my personal statement and doing all of that self-examination, I was actually working with physicians because I'd done some academic research the couple of years before. And it was during that time that I had a major change of heart and just thought, maybe that's not the path for me. And I'm not going to go off on a total tangent, but anyways, I chose wine. And so I came to California. I worked at Harvest and went to the graduate program at Davis, and then went back to Napa. And then I went down to I loved Napa and knew I wanted to stay there. So I wanted to leave to have other experiences before I put my roots down. So I went down to Santa Barbara County and made wine down there for a couple of years. And then, oh my God, my computer is going to die. That's hilarious. Okay, so and then I went to Spain, and I was hired for this project. It was, you know, 5 friends who purchased a vineyard, and they had sold the first couple years of fruit to other people, and this was the first year they were going to make wine, so they hired me as their winemaker. And I was really the only person over there, besides there was one Spanish partner who had kind of experience in wine with his family, but not really. And so it was a lot. It was very much on the learning curve and falling off a lot. And I was managing the crew who farmed in the vineyard, and I was working closely with we had one other grower who had 3 vineyards, and we rented space in somebody else's winery. And I had to go get tanks and pump and a new press. And so the first day we had fruit was this old vine Macabeo that was 60 years old, and it was luckily a very small parcel. But the way we were doing it was the grower who we worked with, who was wonderful, had one of those European kind of car vans, and we picked everything into these probably 30-pound lug boxes, except they were the tall wall European style, and loaded the back of his car van. And it was 3 trips to the winery, which was really just maybe a 10 to 15 minute drive, but all like super snaky mountain roads with no guardrail and a sheer drop off. And so I had been up early with them picking, and I drove the 3 loads drove the wine or the grapes to the winery, unloaded the grapes, got back in the van, drove back to the vineyard, helped him load up. But I mean, I was doing all this alone, and I almost drove off the cliff going back to get the 3rd load, which was unreal. And luckily the van stopped before plummeting, and then some guy pulled off and pushed my van back onto the road. Just really super miracle type thing. But I went back to the winery and I loaded all of those white grapes into the basket press, which Andy and Philippe and Dan know that is like, does not work at all, and tried to press it. And I mean, hours later, the press is exploding because there's so much pressure. The juice can't get out because the screens were totally slimed. It was so bad. And then I had to beg the winemaker at this winery if I could empty my press and basically put it into her old wooden slatted horizontal press and use that. So this day, I mean, it started at who knows what, 5 a.m, finished at 10 a.m. with me just about having a meltdown and doing all of that basically on my own. And I just thought, what did I get myself into? I'm totally in over my head. So I called the main partner and I said, I had 2 requests. I think one was I need help. And 2 was I also couldn't make any international phone calls at the time. So I was like, I need an international calling card because I'm so cut off from everybody. So anyways, that was my in over the head story, but that's just one of many, I'm sure.
Why isn't that in your bio, Helen? I mean, we need that version of the story in there.
Oh my God, my bio sucks in comparison to everybody else's. I have to go I need to write a bio, whatever.
Just kidding.
No, that's amazing. Philippe, I wanted to ask you a question next, which is, I mean, you have the most amazing resume. You've had the most fantastic and world-renowned collaborators, but is there anybody, could be alive or dead, that you wish, early on in your career, you could have asked some questions to that would have guided you?
Well, I mean, it's a tough one. I would say you have to go back to the people really created Napa Valley, where I met a couple of times, but I never really had a chance to have a deep and good conversation with. That was Romer Mondavi, basically. Mm-hmm. I think Mondavi, kind of put really this valley on the map. And of course, there's many other players who are really important. But I would say that's, I wish I could kind of go back to even, 90s, where he was still around and were still running the show. and have a dinner and spend a little bit more time with this guy. I don't know what else to tell you. But,
and
you know, I mean, the wine business is kind of full of, that's what I love about it. It's full of exceptional people. I think coming from so many different backgrounds. It's, you know, you can have people very technical, but you can have people really coming from all kind of horizons and performing and really bring something positive in this business. So I think, you know, what we are missing, it's always, you know, like the youngsters, we want to talk to the past. We want to have a better idea about what was going on in the past, which kind of winemaking they really did, because we know, but we don't know. You know, it's like a lot of people, the wine events that we are making, they think people understand my style of winemaking, and sometimes I say that's not at all what I'm trying to do. So there's sometimes this disconnect that we need, no matter what, to have those true conversations. And unfortunately, sometimes we cannot do it.
Dan, a question for you. Is there something outside of the wine business that keeps you inspired?
Oh, 100%. I got into the wine business because of just aspiration and just a desire to kind of live in another place. I was a kid who grew up in Brooklyn, New York, and went to school in Manhattan and never traveled. My family never vacationed to Europe. So when I started working in magazine publishing, it was a vehicle for me to go to other places. And I read magazines and didn't read books as my transportation vehicle to other places. And so I always wanted to be, living in the pages of, Condé Nast Traveler or Travel and Leisure magazine or anything of the like, or Wine Spectator, which has one of the greatest, travel sections. As a wine geek, as a wine professional. So yeah, I am inspired by, just kind of transportation, like leaving yourself and going somewhere else, whether it's in the pages of a book or a magazine, and just every day, flipping through, I still subscribe to 35 magazines. My mail person hates me. But the magazine industry loves me, and I use that as a daily inspiration, because I want Larkmead to take me to a place. I want Masakan to take me to a place in the wine that's on the table, and I want to translate that feeling to the people who pull the corks from those bottles. So I'm constantly just inspired by writers, journalists, artists, photographers. Not famous photographers, but just photojournalists who take pictures for magazines, who are traveling the world and looking, for lack of a better word, looking for adventure in that sense.
Well, speaking of inspiration, as you said, Dan, Andy, a question for you. Was there ever a bottle of wine that you tasted that inspired you so much that you just changed something about your path or the way that you made wine?
I was hoping you wouldn't ask me that question, but
you all hate my question.
There's so many wines and wine regions and everything that inspire, and it doesn't have to be a wine, like the wines we're making in Napa Valley or anything. For me, though, I mean, what I thought of when I saw that question was, I was very lucky for a while. It's been a few years, but there was a stretch of about 10 years where I would go to Bordeaux like at least once or twice a year and visit people and see what they were doing. And I'm actually drawing a blank now on the proprietor's name, but Philippe would remember the Chateau Osone. Who's the proprietor there? Vautier, Alain Vautier. Alain Vautier, who's the proprietor there.
Yeah, Vautier, Alain Vautier.
I love Cabernet Franc, and most of the wines in Saint-Emilion and Pomerol are Merlot dominant, but Vautier has a passion for Cabernet Franc to the point where he has these tags in his vineyard. He has these old Cabernet Franc vines, and he has tags on the vines with like tasting notes for the fruit. And he uses that as a guide when he grafts other parts of his vineyard. He will use cuttings from these old vines. And anyway, back to the wine question. I mean, tasting his wines from barrel were one of the most inspiring things ever. I mean, every little thing that he was doing on his estate, like he must have spent 15 or 20 years restoring the old residence and chateau there. And the caves there are unbelievable. And he makes a small amount of wine, but the wine is so special. And then I joked with him because it actually is probably true that I can fly there and spend one night in town and taste out a barrel with him, and it's still cheaper than me buying a bottle of his wine. And he just laughed and said, yeah, that's probably true. But those wines are incredible. And I just love Saint-Emilion, the town, the history, the wines. I mean, I know in Napa, we can't make wines like that, and we're not trying to emulate those wines, but I just love the plateau up below the town, and the wines that come off of that just have such a strong sense of place, and I love it. So that's not a bottle of wine, but it's very inspiring to me.
Totally counts. Well, and I don't want to put Kamal on the spot, but before we logged on live, he and I admitted to each other that we were so excited about these wines that we both opened them yesterday. Well, he Coravin them. I wasn't even that disciplined. I opened them yesterday because I couldn't wait to try them. So I'm just curious if Kamal has any thoughts on the wines in front of us.
I truly fell in love with everything. And as I was tasting, I said, oh, I'll just take a sip. I'll do that because I knew tonight I was alone, and I didn't want to open them and not enjoy them fully. But I kept on drinking more and more and more. And being here in this beautiful Miami weather, I was able to sit outside as things are getting crisper and so forth. And I'm blown away. And I've been a big fan from attending the Napa Valley Reserve over the last decade and so forth, and tasting some of the futures and things like that. So I gained a great education throughout this process, and I'm honored and humbled to have such greatness of what you guys do in your vocation. So I'm blown away, and I'm enjoying everything too much. So thank you, guys.
Kamal, I love your painting behind you. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, very cool.
We have quite a lot of questions came in about that painting. So maybe you just tell us about tell everyone about the painting.
He's a great street artist from Chicago, Hebrew Brantley, that we worked with in 2012. And I've just been a big fan of his work. And I happen to end up being the painting where I have the best lighting at home too. So
let's actually go back a bit to Cabernet Franc and talking about that, actually, because we got a couple of questions as to whether sort of Cabernet Franc is becoming a bigger trend coming out of Napa Valley. Obviously Cabernet Sauvignon, we know that and love it well, but any thoughts on that, Philippe, seeing more Cabernet Franc coming out of the region?
Oh, well, I mean, of course, yes, I would say absolutely. You're going to see more and more and more Cabernet Franc. There's probably, obviously, Cabernet Franc have been in this valley, like Andy was saying, he's harvesting some really old vines. I would say Maya from Dalla Valley, who is actually Andy also consulting there, so has been the front runner back in the early 90s to really show that Cabernet Franc, it's really a strong player. My experience, I always felt like Cabernet Franc was like a perfect blender, but being on his own, being 100% Cabernet Franc, of course, as a winemaker, I love it. No questions, but I think, being 100% might be a little bit more difficult for the consumer, because this is a grape, like I always mentioned, for me, at least personally, who needs more time to age. It's always, what I call the tough guy who never want to talk to you. You go, like all those people that we're meeting in vineyards, especially in Europe, Italy, France, who are like, who are you? I'm never going to tell you what I'm doing. And so you have to really work them out and drink a lot of wine until you get some answers. And Cab Franc has a little bit this concept where, he's not going to tell you everything right away. You really have to be very detailed and very I mean, obviously cautious and strong into the farming. It's all about the grape, really. And if you push it too hard, it's going to kick your ass and say, I don't like that. Where Cabernet Sauvignon is much more flexible in terms of the type of winemaking you can really do. So the fact that I think, you know, Cabernet Franc is coming stronger and stronger, you know, a lot of people are replanting Merlot into Cabernet Franc, which we feel is more suitable under those, I would say, even warmer and more difficult climatic conditions. And so I think Cabernet Franc has a bright future. It's never going to be the king of Napa Valley, but is going to really help a lot of vintners to make better wines. That's, I'm really convinced.
Any thoughts on that you want to add, Helen or Andy or Dan?
I agree with what Philippe's saying. I mean, I'm a huge fan. I think you see more of it being offered, but I think the volume is still very small. I mean, the amount of grapes that are planted is still really small, and it's quite a difficult grape to grow. I mean, Cabernet Sauvignon is king for a reason. Like Philippe said, it's very forgiving. I mean, you can grow 4 tons an acre of excellent Cabernet Sauvignon on vineyards, and on the same vineyard, Cabernet Franc, you have to limit the yield to, you know, 2.5, 3 tons an acre to get the yield, the wine that you want, because it's just very finicky. It needs to be on very well drained soils. It does like afternoon sun, like Philippe's saying. It's good for a dry, warm climate. It's well suited, but as a business proposition, you really have to be an enthusiast, because if you're farming, you know, you're basically getting like 2/3 of the yield, and I think it's worth the struggle. I just love the wine, so that's why we do it. But I think you're going to see more offerings with Cabernet Franc on the label. It's really, like Philippe said, it's not great 100%. It needs something to round it out and make it a little friendlier, but I'm just a huge fan. Great aromatics, powerful wines, long-lived.
Yeah.
Perfect. And going back a bit, we got a couple of questions for you, Dan, about talking about taking that risk, as you mentioned, and really committing to it if this is truly something that you want to do, given whatever path someone may have taken before. What would you recommend to somebody who's actually looking to take that risk? Would it be to, you know, study, go to school, potentially for viticulture, enology, maybe take an apprenticeship somewhere? Couple questions about that came in.
No, for sure. I mean, you have to think about it. I measure everything in pie charts. And if you think about Napa Valley and how many wineries there are in Napa Valley, and there's 1,700 wineries or so in Napa Valley, and Philippe makes wine for 1,500 of them, you only have an opportunity to be a winemaker in 200 wineries. Sorry.
Great to get you on this one.
But I do think you have to measure. You have to take risk, but you also be measured risk taking, and you have to understand, like, there's not a lot of opportunity to be a winemaker in Napa Valley. I was in the right place at the right time, and but it all stems from passion and like your ability to withstand, you know, the ups and downs and the roller coaster of leaving a life and moving on to something else. But it's about passion, and if you're not passionate about something, you're not willing to take 2 steps back to take 1 step forward, or 3 steps forward eventually. And that's really the hardest part of it. Education is really important. I think education, you know, drinking wine, the best part about drinking wine is like swinging a baseball bat. It's repetition. It's swinging a golf club. It's repetition. It's drinking and tasting and understanding and thinking. It's like the first day I walked at Larkmead's property with the owner and Andy Smith, the winemaker, and Andy was tasting grapes and was able to project what the potential wine was going to be about. The owner turned to me and said, "Can you do that?" I was like, "No fucking way, I can't do that." I'm like, but it's repetition over time, your palate memory and experience. And these are the things that are important to winemaking. It's not studying, you know, pHs and TAs. And I love that Vanessa started the whole conversation saying this is not about pH and TA. This is about a passion, and living is about, you know, kind of passion of lifestyle and living. So it's really about repetition and doing the things that we want to do. And you have to be, you know, you have to be kind of committed to it. You can't just say, I want to do it because I want to do it. You have to really want to take that risk and take steps backwards. It took me just be honest with you, it took me 7 years living in Napa Valley to get back to the salary I was making in New York City when I left it. If you're not willing to do that, if you don't have the wherewithal to do that and the resources to do it, don't do it.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think a lot of, even I'm sure Kamal can sort of attest to that as well, at being an entrepreneur. But Helen, we got a lot of questions about that story you opened with. And just given a little bit about what Dan said about taking that risk and really committing no matter what adversities you may face. After that near-death experience, what made you continue to do what you do to get to where you are today?
Well, it definitely didn't throw me off wanting to make wine. But I will say I woke up the next morning and the whole world was Technicolor. I mean, I was so grateful to be alive, and just everything was so sharp and crisp and clear. And I just thought, I just need to not, I'm such a yes person. I have a really hard time saying no, and I'm very good at taking on too much. And I still do it, but I've gotten a lot better about not pushing myself beyond what's healthy. I hope I can say that. I don't know. What was the question? How did I keep going for winemaking? I mean, it was easy. I was living in Prairie, which is one of the most stunningly beautiful places on the planet. And everywhere you look, there are, you know, vineyards that are on super steep slopes, and there's evidence of old 100-year-old terraces on other slopes that you can see have been grown over and taken over by the forest. I mean, it was easy. It was such an adventure, and it was totally learning. And to Dan's point, you know, I was headed into medicine, which was medicine is, I think I would have been totally happy, and it's a great career. We have so many friends in medicine, but it was definitely, you know, way more financially stable than going into winemaking. And when I moved to California and started at Davis, and they told us how much money we were going to make as a winemaker, which obviously not my motivation at all, it still isn't to this day, and it can't be. But I was just thinking, God, how am I going to support myself making? I think told us at that time we could make $35,000 a year. That was going to be the average salary. And when I was first out of college, I made $22,000 a year. So I thought, geez, I'm really not, anyways, I ended up in winemaking, and it didn't matter because every day was amazing and still is. And there's really I don't ever have the feeling of waking up and thinking, oh, I have to go to work today, ever. I don't ever have that feeling. Every time I drive around Napa or any, you know, Sonoma or the foothills, I'm very aware of how beautiful it is and how lucky I feel to be making wine and getting to work with Mother Nature and farming and just that synergy of really trying to make wine at the highest level, but with all of the inputs, all of these small details that have such a great big impact on the final product. So.
And if you ever waver on that passion and commitment, I believe someone's just called Dan the Tony Robbins of Napa. So just
Wow.
with Dan, and you'll be good to go. But anyway, this is a question for Andy, Helen, and Philippe. All of you have a presence in the Plymouth area. Helen already mentioned the Shake Ridge Vineyard. Any other thoughts on that wine region as a whole? Maybe Andy.
You know what I love about it, and we've worked with Shake Ridge Vineyard for a long time, even before it was planted, and so my heart is there. I have a friend. It's a pretty funny story. I have a friend who is in the Shenandoah Valley. Well, he lives in San Francisco, but his family has an old property in Shenandoah. And about 15 years ago, I went out there, and it was a walnut orchard at the time. And he said, well, we're going to do a vineyard, so I want some advice from you. we met for a day. He said, I'm not going to call you again until I need your advice again. And then about 10 years later, he called and he said, remember when I said I wasn't going to call you again until I needed your help again? Well, we have a vineyard now and I need your help again. So I've been helping him make wine up there. And it's just so fun because it's completely different from what we do in Napa Valley. And that's what I love about it. I mean, I love where we are. I love the varieties we work with in Napa, but you know, up in Amador, we're making Vermentino and we're making Toraldigo and we're making Tempranillo-based wines and, you know, planting all sorts of different things that, you know, we just planted some Greco de Tufo. I mean, it's just really fun. Shout out to Dan Petrovsky.
Dan.
So, and I've never made that.
Andy, it's lower yielding than Cabernet Franc, by the way.
All right, so Dan, I'm just going to quote my friend. I won't call you until I need your help, which will be in a couple of years when the Greco. Actually, I will be calling you. I'll be seeing you, but you're going to help me with my Greco de Tufo in a couple of years. So anyway, it's just fun. It's a completely different world. It is the Wild West. I mean, literally, it's the Wild West. And you know, there are gold mines that are still operating up there because the price of gold has gotten so high, and it's just a fun part of California to drive up and do something different. So that's what I love about it.
Can I just say one thing about, Andy mentioned gold mines and gold rush. When I moved to California, being a New Yorker for my entire life, the first thing I did was watch Deadwood on the HBO series. So if anyone has not seen it and they're going into shelter in place and to, you know, the dark, cold, dark winter of COVID, and you haven't seen Deadwood, please watch the whole series. It's a great kind of binge-worthy HBO movie. And it reminds me of, you know, Amador, and it reminds me of, you know, kind of eastern, you know, east of Napa. So just wanted to throw a plug in there for a good.
Oh, listen,
the dark times.
Netflix recommendations are very valuable right now, more than ever before. So that's great. Anything you'd like to add to that, Philippe and Helen?
Well,
Not the Netflix thing. Or the Netflix thing.
Helen, you're welcome to just go.
Thanks,
Move
Philippe.
first.
I mean, I would just add, just kind of what Andy alluded to. You can grow anything up there. I mean, they really. It's funny. I was on a Sierra Foothills panel years back, and there was it was broken into like young winemakers, which years back I was young. And then there were the older winemakers, and all the young winemakers were like, yeah, we can grow anything here. And the older winemakers were like, you can grow anything here. What do we do? And I just thought, like, it's such an asset. It's just the world's their oyster up there. They can grow whatever they want. You know, there's so many different things that thrive up there. And because it hasn't really been labeled as like Pinot Chardonnay or Bordeaux varietals or Rhone varietals. I mean, they can really just do anything. The soils are unbelievable. They're mind-blowing soils. You drive around and you get to see all of these cuts where they made the road that have, you know, granite outcroppings or these gorgeous red soils, and just rocks, and just, it's so.
This is a soil sample from Amador. This is a quartz crystal that came up out of the soil in the Syrah vineyard up there that just the tractor just drove through, and there it is.
Yeah.
So crazy. That's Amador County right there.
Totally. That's totally it. Thank you so much. I don't have any rocks around here.
Yeah, like I'm turning around.
I'm glad I can help.
Well,
I have one.
I don't.
Big crab leg.
Barrel
Wait.
sample of some Amador wine.
You don't have one? I
I
thought we all
should.
had. I thought we were all coming with our own rock tonight.
Wasn't
Sorry.
it on the document?
I didn't get the memo.
That's so good.
I love this discussion though, because, you know, as we sort of mentioned earlier on, the idea was, you know, these amazing influencers from Napa Valley, but, you know, two of the wines tonight are not, you know, we've got Amador and Sonoma represented, but I love this discussion because I'm sure you all get this as well, which is, of course, we love Napa Valley, you know, it's our home. We love Napa Valley Cabernet and Bordeaux varieties, but what other region is exciting you? You know, I get this question all the time. What should I know about that's outside of Napa? So I love that this conversation has taken this turn.
Yeah.
Speaking of, are there other regions? Like if there was a region, I don't know, Philippe, let's put this to you. Is there a region that you would just love to get your hands dirty in that you haven't?
Well, yeah, I mean, I would say there's so many, first of all, there's so many wine regions. That's the great part of the wine business, because there's always a different type of terroir of land. You start with a land. So, and on the side note, that's what amazed me always in this business and keep amazing me is, you can do 100 feet and have a totally different wine, and always you like what's going on, and why this wine is so different. They are so neighboring to each other, and that's kind of really what keeps us going, I think, in this business. But in terms of the wine region, I think what exciting a little bit is kind of knowing that some of the extreme wine region who couldn't make any wine now starting to get the feel like they might be able to make wine, and you're starting to go north, and especially Canada, maybe those kind of wine region were totally not irrelevant, but more like a very local market. And now you start to see some really interesting product coming from there. So I think really the wine business is evolving. It's also what we love about it, because it's never static. It's always moving. Napa is changing. All the wine region are changing. And you start to see, like sparkling in England, something like Cabernet in Okanagan. So, you start to see those new things happening. And that's what keeps us super excited, because we are like young kids. I mean, that's what keeps us going, is like, what can we do? Is it anything new we can create and try? It's always about trying. So that's at least a broad view about what I will say about your question. Yeah.
Wow. Thank you.
Well, we have so many questions. I guess, shall we talk a bit about food pairings, Vanessa, with our wines that we have today? Because that sort of came up a lot. So with the chosen wines that we're tasting, which again, I've added the links to the chat for everybody who's still asking. Any thoughts on food pairings with these wines? Helen?
Oh my gosh. Okay, so food.
Ouch.
Let's see. So sumo has a lot of really dark fruit, boysenberry and black peppercorn, and then some pretty high notes too of, I always think of like stargazer lilies, and there's kind of a stone fruit character as well. And then obviously it's petit syrah, so you've got more like dark, I don't know if I'd go as far as creosote, but tar characters. So it's one thing I love about Rhone varietals is and Petite is sort of like not really a Rhone varietal, but anyways, it fits in our portfolio, and it's a good friend of the Rhone varietals. So it's just that they're really flexible, and you can drink them with so many different foods. So I think sumo you could totally do with just an easy like winter ribeye with the classic sides of Brussels sprouts or greens and potatoes. Or I think it goes really well with duck, short rib. What else? Bolognese, I think you could totally, I mean, yeah, it could go with a lot. You could do a wild mushroom risotto. It's a good winter wine, let me say that. But I think you can drink it year round for sure. So
I agree. Andy, any thoughts on your wine that you'd like to add for food pairings?
Getting very hungry listening to all this discussion. But, it's funny. The wine that I chose is really taking on this, like the herbal notes are turning into very sort of savory, food-friendly notes, like some rosemary, floral notes in the wine. And it makes me think of, if you guys remember Trevigna restaurant back in the day, they had this lamb pasta. Do you remember the lamb pasta that they had there? I would die for a plate of that right now with a glass of this wine. So, something fairly gamey and rich and nice. And yeah, like Helen said, this is also a winter wine, but it's also winter weather. So I'd love a bowl of pasta with some ground up lamb on it with herbs.
Awesome. Beautiful. Dan?
No, I agree with Andy 100% on that one. It's we don't have to limit, red wines, bigger, richer, Napa Valley red wines to kind of like meat-based dishes or big kind of fire-based dishes. And it was funny. I was reading a magazine last night, Imbibe, a magazine about beverage, about cocktail culture, and they had an advertisement for the region of Barbera d'Asti. Barbera, the grape from northern Italy, northwestern Italy, and Piemonte. And you read through all of the text. They wanted to tell their entire story in this one advertisement. It was like 1,000 words. It was crazy. And at the bottom it said, and just, for a culturally like weird, this is a secret, but we drink a lot of Barbera while eating fish. I was like, what? Like Barbera and fish? I'm like, what? I mean, so I think that, what I think that really, signifies to me is that you got to drink what you like, and you got to pair it with what you like, and you have to kind of create your own palate and in your home or in your, when you're dining out. But the 2010 Larkmead Solari is hitting that kind of perfect spot in the 10-year trajectory of Napa Valley Cabernet, in my opinion, where the wines start to show secondary and tertiary notes of floral characters and herbaceous characters, and a little bit less of the kind of the fruit forwardness and woodiness that you get in your youth. And it's really opens itself up for a wide range of dishes. And I really loved Andy's recommendation about, his 2011 and thinking about, pasta and lamb, pasta, maybe a rabbit ragu or something. That I think those are just fun, really winter November dishes that I want to eat and drink Napa red wines.
Beautiful. And Philippe?
Yeah, I think I'm going for dinner. Take care, guys.
I'm with you.
I'm bringing the wine actually as well. Well, it's Thanksgiving soon, so our brain is more about how to cook the famous beast. Every year it's a big questions, and I think obviously all those wines could be really well drunk during Thanksgiving. But I would say when you have Cab Franc and Merlot, and I see 2015 being riper, a lot of texture on the wine. If you don't want to overpower with more texture in the food, I think, going back to seafood, it could be, one of the great dinner that I had with a chef from Hawaii, created some smoked mussels. That was really interesting, because you have the fatness of the mussel, but I think the smokiness and spiciness sometimes add a little bit more excitement and combine very well with the wine. And on a side note, I always love, there's a Bordeaux traditional fish dish with a fish, which is a river fish. It's like a cousins of eel, if you wish. It's called lamproie, and it's cooked with red wine. And it's really, for me, very exciting. It's really bring a lot of a good feel of between texture and structures and flavors, everything combined perfectly with those kind of wines.
Beautiful.
And then after we can go dessert. If we had some sweetness, we go crazy dessert. And I'm sure we guys have a little sweet tooth. I don't know, I was looking at tiramisu and it's always a tough one with tiramisu because obviously it's Italian. So I'm like, always like, should I make an Italian dish? I don't know if it's in my DNA here. But when you look, it's a visual, it's so unbelievable on some of the dessert. And the layers remind me sometimes the layers that you can find with wines. We always talk about layers, and sometimes the consumer have a little difficulty to understand it, but it's really, some wines bring different level of flavors, I always say, and that's what you kind of want to look at. So anyway, a little side note on the sweet note, so I like my dessert.
I'm with you on that one.
Hungry now.
Sure. Oh yeah. We actually went much longer than we took too much of your time, so I apologize. But I'm gonna hand it over to Vanessa for a final question before myself and Kamal offer some closing remarks. So Vanessa.
No, this has been amazing. And, I think Deyvanshi and I are in agreement that we definitely need a part 2, because there's no way to unearth all the amazing stories from the 4 of you and to answer all the questions that are in the chat. But just one last question.
Wait, I have an idea, Vanessa. Let's do it in person next summer. When it's safe to do so, let's get together in person.
Yes.
And open the wines and have a meal together.
I love that.
Perfect.
I love that.
We're inviting her.
I love it. So yeah, just one last question. This is sort of for each of you, but just a brief thought, which is just going back to where we started with, which was sort of your stories, how you got here, who inspired you, who are your mentors. We talked, I think Philippe, you mentioned, Robert Mondavi and his influence on Napa Valley. Dan, you talked about, people asking you what they should do and talking about risks. But to go back to this idea of mentorship. So, for each of you, and Dan, maybe we'll start with you, but if you ideally, 20 years from now, let's say you had a mentor and they were going to speak about you and say something that you told them that would really make you proud, what would that be?
Don't listen to your elders. No, seriously, I do think that, change, I think we're all afraid of change in life. And this goes back to my risk-taking comment. We're all afraid of change in life. And I think that, we're moving into probably one of the greatest change periods of our lifetime in the next 20 years. And I think we have to be able to break through, what's comfortable and make sure that we're kind of evolving and adapting. And I think if COVID hasn't taught you that, in 2020, you're kind of fucked moving forward. So, 20 years from now, I hope that someone says, Dan taught me to not, fear change and to kind of like think about, evolution and adaptation. And I think wine is perfect for that, because there's no better time to be a wine drinker or a winemaker. And I think the next 20 to 30 years is going to be pretty phenomenal for all of us.
Absolutely. Philippe, any thoughts on that?
Well, I love if people can remember, the company. It's because it's not about me, it's really about the company, and really feel like we created a great platform for young winemakers to really learn the business the right way. And that's what will make me very proud at the end. Yeah.
Great. Andy, your thoughts?
What I always think about and what I would say is like, leave things better than the way you found them. I see our jobs as being stewards of the land and stewards of this valley, and in the bottom of what we do, it's farming and creating things. And I've been in the valley now for 25 years, and there's so much that's happened. And I think it's up to us to make sure that it moves in the direction that we want it to move. And, for people that come in and want to be involved in the winemaking, I would say get involved and be a part of the community and help to make it better than it was when you got here at first. And I feel like, I feel we're very blessed to do what we do and to be where we are and to just think about making something better out of what we've already got.
Yeah.
I think it kind of builds on what the other two guys said as well.
Yeah. And Helen, your thoughts?
What am I supposed to be answering? This is what I
if on the thoughts of mentorship, if 20 years from now a mentor of yours was saying, the best thing that Helen told me, what would make you proud if that person sort of repeated that about you?
So this is what my mentor would say about me. Sorry, I was thinking this is
somebody that you mentored.
Someone that I mentored, or someone who mentored me?
Someone that you mentored.
I'm not even drinking right now.
Helen, just say something profound. That's all you have to do.
Just dig deep. Just be brilliant, Helen.
okay, so if this is supposed to be someone I'm mentoring, I would say, I hope that that they would say that I taught them, or that I helped them realize, oh, that sounds so like uppity, that I helped them realize that their path may not lead them where they thought they were going to go. And don't get so hung up on where you think you're supposed to be going and this goal that you've set for yourself. Try to allow the organic path of where your life and your journey with wine leads you, because you know, I just had a recent conversation with someone I'm mentoring who is basically super, super talented and super bright, and being held down by the people around him because they're basically threatened by him because he's amazing. And I just said to him, you know what? The really great people, they succeed. So don't worry about them. Just keep going where you want to go, because your path may not lead you exactly where you thought, but you will land on your feet. You're going to end up well. So follow that passion and just keep driving. I don't know. Is that what you were supposed to say?
Yes, that's exactly what we were looking for, Helen. Way to bring it home.
What did you say? What did you say? Could you repeat the
Let's
middle?
just start over. We'll just start over.
I do it with the French accent.
There you go. Now you're talking.
Merci.
Damien.
Thank you all. Deyvanshi, back to you.
Yeah, no, I mean, gosh, I wish, first of all, like I said, we kept all of you way longer than we promised we would, but just like one of our attendees said today, she said, Sally Allen said, thank you all, the panelists who were so eloquent and shared their wine insights and history so beautifully. And I couldn't have said it better myself. You know, one of the things that we talk about a lot on these panels is just the stories behind wine, and not only the stories behind each bottle and each winemaker, but also the stories that we share here together and how wine brings us all together, even at a time like this when we can't unfortunately be physically together, but thank God for Zoom and FaceTime and whatever else we're using, because this is pretty special. I've got to say, we are so blessed, like you said, Andy, that we all get to do what we love and share these stories with one another and with people that are like-minded and interested to hear all these insights. So you're all legends at what you do. So I can't thank you enough for sharing your time and your wine with us. I'm so honored. And on behalf of everyone on Haute Living, I know we're all very excited about this, and so excited always to partner with Vanessa and Wine Access and telling these stories and continuing the wine education process and this wine journey that we're all on. It's just so special to continue to do this with you, Vanessa. So I thank you so much.
Likewise.
I'd love some closing remarks from Vanessa and Kamal.
Well, I mean, I feel like I almost, there's nothing more that I can add to this discussion based on, you know, these remarks from these panelists, other than just to again say, I can't believe we got you all here tonight. Thank you. This is truly, you know, the most impressive panel discussion that I've been a part of. So thank you so much. And I want to say, like, I think it's so important that you are sharing your experiences and your stories. I mean, always, but especially right now, I think it's important to remember sort of the humanness of all of us and how we all have our own experiences. And Helen, I especially loved your comments about, you know, things change and that's okay, and accept that and embrace that, and you know, that's part of 2020 and part of probably what will be 2021. But we have wine, we have each other, we have Zoom, and hopefully Andy next summer we'll be doing this in person. So
Yes.
Yes, thank you panelists so much, and I can't thank Haute Living, Deyvanshi and Kamal so much again for being such wonderful friends and partners to be into Wine Access. So thank you so much. And Kamal,
Just thank
you.
Wine Access. Thank you guys for helping us aggregating such greatness. And the reality is your entrepreneurial journey has been as impressive as our wine journey. So as every step of the way, what you guys have done from where you've started to where you've gotten has been a super impressive for myself and for everyone listening. So I want to thank you guys, and thank you Wine Access. Thank you Deyvanshi and everyone that helped put this together tonight. So cheers, and looking forward to this summer together.
Yes.
Yeah.
Cheers, everybody.
And thank you everyone for joining us today. I've got a lot of questions if this is going to be recorded. If you want to watch it again, yes, it'll be on our Haute TV YouTube page. And of course, we're going to do continue to do some fantastic stuff with Wine Access. So thank you all for being here. Wishing you all the very best. Stay safe, healthy, and we'll see you soon.
Thanks,
Thank you.
everybody.
You all.
Thank you.
Thank you.